Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome to the Counter Clipping Show for Monday, August 2nd. I keep thinking it's July for some reason. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Pancaldi, as several people have already determined, for the intro music. A link to his amazing channel is in the video description. The other thing that is in the video description is a link to our channel of the week, which is the Tabletop's Edge. There are at least two other channels that were doing tutorial-esque stuff on World in Flames that threw up their hands and abandoned that effort when the Tabletop's Edge started doing it, because they're doing a better job there than any of the rest of us were. So check that out, especially if you're interested in World in Flames. Again, link in the video description. So, tonight we are clipping the same thing we were last week, The Coming Storm. We definitely should finish this week. I may actually finish well before we're done, because I actually only have the 1807 Coalition forces to go. I did clip a little bit of this, and we are drinking something new. This is new to me, too. Actually, I hadn't tried this before. This is Glendronach. This is a Highland Scotch. It is 12 years old, bottled at 43%. It is very good. It is not hideously... It's not especially cheap. Here in Ohio, where the prices are a little higher than they are in a lot of places, ran about $63. It is very good. It is worth the $63. It is known as an alternative to Macallan, for those of us whom Macallan has priced out of the market. There we go. Because Macallan here in Ohio runs about $80 a bottle now. This is heavily sherried, which means that it is matured in ex-sherry casks, which lends it a lot of really good wood character and a lot of stone fruit notes and things like that. So it's pretty fantastic. So let us shout out to Strelnikov, Carl Creeder, Ronald Nicholson, Jeff Beeler, Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, Terrence Bonham, Joe Faust, Kaiser Bill, Shane W., Matt Taylor. I don't want to miss anybody here, and I don't have a way to do this well. Henry Sikorsky, Kevin Paulson, which I stumbled over for some reason, John Friesen, Matt Davidson, S.C., Daniel Berger, Stigler is in the house, Greg Grant, Cal Reese, Shane W., I thought I mentioned you already, Charles Latora, Fast Hines, Lee Grant, Douglas Gearhart, Steve Dolges is in the house. Speaking of people who have done tons of high-quality whiff videos, check Steve's channel out if you have not done so already. No, this is new. This is yesterday, in fact, so if you see that it is bleeding at any point, please do not be alarmed. It's quite sore still. So, it's not new, but I just got color applied to it yesterday, so... So, very happy with this. It does need, in my opinion, a little bit of water. Bottled at 43%. So, 43%, maybe it needs water, maybe it doesn't. Sometimes even at 40%, it needs a little bit of water. This is very dense. There's a lot going on in here. It's very tannic. A lot of stone fruit type stuff going on. A lot of warm spices going on. So, there's a lot to unpack, and adding a little water will help open it up. So, GT Pony Rider, thanks for stopping by. So we are now into the Russians of 1807. There are a little bit of Prussian remnants left in this led by Russian-led force, but not too much. So mostly we're just going to be clipping Russians, and then we're done. I don't need to clip any of the markers in this game, so because I have a marker tray for the Library of Napoleonic Battles titles. Speaking of which, Wargaming news. GMT is having a summer sale starting on the 4th. It is working more or less like their sales tend to, which is for every P500 game you got from them in the last year or so, then, and there's a list, they provided a list, you qualify for one thing out of their catalog at 50% off. So I looked through their catalog, and I'm tempted by a couple of things. I am almost certainly, however, going to order an enormous stack of counter trays. Another piece of news, which is germane to OSG specifically, is that the reprint of 4 Lost Battles is now up for pre-order on the OSG website. So if you're in the market for that, Do check it out. That goes along with I didn't see a release date, and I haven't pre-ordered it yet, and I probably won't until next month, for reasons I may or may not get into. But the annual new Library of Napoleonic Battles games is a Napoleon or Bonaparte in the Quadrilateral, which is pre-Empire, pre-Napoleon crowning himself emperor campaign in Italy, I believe. So that's pretty interesting and a topic that doesn't see that much attention. So I hate the DVG counter trays, Tomas. I think they're garbage and fit only for the wastebasket. It's possible that they have improved them since I had them pass through my hands, but as far as the ones I have a couple that I have just discarded because the lids don't fit. So, I mean, I toss every once in a while. You'll get GMT trays from different decades or something like that, and the lids won't fit, and I toss those too. So, it's not DVG. I think Lock and Load does the deep dish counter trays where the lids do snap on. So, Stigler, we just mentioned that. I thought I mentioned that. Now, the ammo crate boxes are pretty nice, actually. I have no problem with any of the other DVG components, just their counter trays I don't think are very good. So, if GMT is out of stock on counter trays, then that's going to disappoint me enormously. Just a Guard, thanks for stopping by. John Longshore as well, Krusty Captain. Arnman, who found his or her copy of Avalon Hill Circus Maximus in shrink wrap. There you go. That's a nice little present for yourself from the previous you. I do not like the Chessex trays. I do use them for Avalon Hill games specifically, and the relatively rare other publisher, OSG's been one of them in the past, that has used Avalon Hill sized boxes. The Chessex trays fit in the Avalon Hill boxes. My copy of Napoleon at Bay, which is an OSG edition, is in an Avalon Hill sized box and does not fit a GMT counter tray, unless I wanted to trim the GMT counter tray, which I would rather not have to do. I just don't want to bother with it. Now, if you want to go with like not counter trays, there's tons of options. I like the Doris bead trays. You can get them from Amazon. I use that for my whiff stuff. They run about $6 a piece, and they're very large though. So if they definitely won't fit in a box. And the goal for me is usually to get this stuff in the box. So we'll see. I think I qualify for 2 or 3 GMT discount titles. The trouble with that, and somebody on Board Game Geek was talking about this too, and maybe they were going after the same point that where I was at, where it's like, look, I have everything that I need from GMT already. I don't need that much from them that's in print right now, right? I have all the old stuff that I want, pretty much, and I have, I'm certainly waiting on a bunch of stuff to show up that I have P500 ordered, but there's not that much of like the current inventory that I feel that I need. I know that, so Navajo Wars, as far as, if you can order 2 things, you can order stacks of 20 counter trays. I know because I've done that before in their sales. So if they have counter trays, I would get as many as you want. I mean, as many as you feel you'll need. I know that I could buy 20 counter trays and they won't last until the next GMT sale. So I would think about buying 40. But if they're out of print, and I didn't check that, so Versailles 1919 is pretty cool. I will tell you that. GMT did have counter trays out of stock for quite a while, actually, but they did restock. They did get them back in stock some months ago, but that could be that they're already gone. That is plausible. The thing I don't like about the Chessex counter trays is that the lid does not detach, and they're not as bad as the older ones where the lid, there was tension on the lid. The new ones kind of lay flat. You could still set something on it and counters go flying. which I do not like, but they're not as bad as the old ones. So, like I said, I do use them where I have to. I guess I don't have to. It is optional, but... I don't like the Plano trays. I think they're too bulky. I prefer those Doris trays that I mentioned. Doris bead trays. You can get them on Amazon for something, and Walmart has them too, for something like $6. Steve has been clipping some OCS stuff and needs counter trays, but for now it's baggies. Man, boy, what a pain in the nethers put back in OCS and baggies would be. I mean, anything but the smallest OCS games would be a huge hassle to organize in baggies. Okay, so Julio Lopez, welcome to the stream. Asks about opinions on Flying Colors. I think Flying Colors is a very nice game. I actually just picked up relatively recently the new third edition. I think it's a third edition or third printing or whatever that's in the 3-inch box with all the expansion stuff. It's very nice. The thing to remember with Flying Colors is that where something like Close Action or Wooden Ships and Iron Men is more of a ship-on-ship game, or maybe 2 ships per person, something like that. Flying Colors is intended for fleet actions, so it's easier to run big fleet engagements with relatively smaller number of people with Flying Colors than it is in those other games without having 20 players, right? Nevsky. That's true. Carl Creeder, welcome. Mentions that you do get, I think, 1 bonus P500 credit for the sale, so anybody can get one thing at 50% off. And 50% off is a huge discount, right? Also, if you look at their specials page, you get 50% off of those too, which makes some of those games virtually free. So do check that out. ID Jester, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, I don't really want to talk about it again because it's depressing and it's kind of still going on. We had a family medical issue, which I'm happy to say is doing much better than it was, but that did cause me to be out of the loop for some time. And then this week we found out that a family friend, I'm somewhat oversimplifying and using that term, a family friend passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. So I didn't miss anything, but things have been less organized this week for the last week or so than I had hoped. So apologies for that. Nevertheless, the plan is to have the sale, and I'll talk about this on next week's stream where all the formal announcement type things will be done. The plan is to have the sale video out next week. I will tell you that I gave patrons an hour or a day head start on the sale video last time, and I liked that idea. But this time it's probably going to be more a matter of a few hours rather than an entire day. It was just harder to organize it, and I had to you have to manually manage that stuff. Next time it'll probably be more like a couple hours, and I hope to have the giveaway video up next week as well. Again, I'll talk about that on next week's. I looked at the specials page, so I know it the other day, so I know it is still there. Try and keep this organized here. Matt Davidson qualified for 16 GMT games. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. Now, if this wasn't a disrupted year with logistics worldwide in the toilet, I might qualify for quite a few as well. But as it is, I'm talking 2021 rather than 2020. As it is, I'll probably have a half a dozen. So, assuming several things that I expect to make it out this year do. So, John Longshore mentions All Bridges Burning, which is the, I think, latest coin game, which has gotten a good response, but it did have some errata problems. There is an errata kit that GMT has that they will issue you for free, which will replace all the problem components. Daniel, thanks for stopping by. Stigler, with the baggies, you can make nice little cards to put in the baggies too. I do labels for counter trays usually. What am I using? These are Avery labels. These are the Avery labels that I use. These particular labels do fit in the tops of a GMT counter tray. And this is number 5195, if that's useful to anybody. So if you Google Avery 5195, you will get that package of labels in various denominations. So, Krusty Captain says that he's looking at the Next War series. Well, I'll tell you what, I've talked about this a bit at length before, and it's not what that series isn't. It's near future hypothetical, but it's near future hypothetical now instead of near future hypothetical when now was 1980. So, which is a thing that we are seeing a lot of come back, and which is in the list of topics for future streams, which we will get to our topic tonight at some point. Stickers fall across the seams. That's okay. I mean, you could probably make that work, but yeah, not a fan. But then again, I didn't buy the game, so E4 Airman, welcome back. Ordered 4 Lost Battles, very good. Stigler pretty much agrees with me on Flying Colors versus Wooden Ships and Iron Men. Wooden Ships and Iron Men is a total classic. It is an iconic game. And I am not bad-mouthing it in any way and saying it is just a different game than Flying Colors. So, let's see here. Well, that's interesting. Alright, let's figure out what we're doing. I see 2 different AGs. There's AG being led by Bagration and AG being led by Markov. And AG being led by Barclay de Tully. Okay, well, they're all going in the same department. How's that sound? That eliminates the problem right there. Stephen Reynolds, yeah, pretty much. I mean, I pretty much have the stuff that I want, and I still have, even now, I still have more GMT titles than I do from everybody else. It's not quite as much as everybody else put together, but it's not that far away. I'm like 44% GMT. So I have a lot of GMT, and there's very little that I need. I don't know that there's anything that I need that's actually been released. I guess I technically need Barbarossa Army Group Center, but that's coming back hopefully by the end of the year, and various other things that I have on order. I have ordered and canceled that order twice now, by the way, and it's back on again. Steve, that was going to be my suggestion. Would be to cut the stickers along the seam, and that might fix the problem. Daniel Berger says, Dark Summer or Stalingrad? I'd say let your interest in topic guide you on that. I have not played the Dark Summer, but I have played the Dark Valley, which uses the same or a very similar Ted Racer system. The Dark Valley is pretty great. I have a very high opinion of it. So if you're interested in the D-Day topic and you want a one-map D-Day game, then by all means go for the Dark Summer. But if you'd rather have, a somewhat zoomed-in Mark Simonich game, then I unhesitatingly recommend Stalingrad 42. So I think you're getting more hours of play in Stalingrad 42, but all I'm really saying is it takes longer to play than the Dark Summer. So So if you're more interested in one topic or the other, I think they're both. I can tell you, Stalingrad 42 is a good game, and I'm reasonably certain that the Dark Summer is as well. Wooden Ships and Iron Men can and Close Action can very trivially be adapted for play with miniatures of the right scale. Doug Sunset, if I haven't said hi, thanks for stopping by. Prefers Hoist the Signal for Close Action to Wooden Ships and Iron Men for minis. Ah, okay. That is one of the add-ons for Close Action. I think that's a taste thing. I think Close Action is more up to date. I mean, it's a much more recent design, but clearly it leans a lot on Wooden Ships and Iron Men too. So there's that. So. Now, the Dark Summer is one that I would think about for that sale, because I don't have it. And I passed on it for a couple of reasons. One, it hit at what was a bad time for me. I was unemployed at the time, and it was very difficult to justify spending money on a wargame at that point. And not that I spent no money on wargames during that period. That number wasn't zero, but that number was quite a bit smaller than I would have otherwise preferred. And I have kind of a lot of D-Day games, including a couple one-map D-Day games. So, Jeff, I think that the supplement P500 orders do count. Go by the Gene Billingsley post. There's a list of what qualifies in there. So go by that. But there's a bunch of stuff that is supplements in there. We are about to have our third session of the new NATO Cold War Gone Hot from Compass. We're very happy with it so far. I think we are going to close that session tomorrow with setting up one of the campaigns, which I expect it to take us 2 to 3 weeks to play through, something like that. If NATO broke sales records for Compass, that's fantastic. Their previous sales record, I think Bill had said was Stellar Horizons, which I like a lot, but and is the kind of thing that I would expect might sell really well, because it reaches outside of Compass's typical audience. But then again, a lot of people, there was a lot of excitement about NATO, and there's a bunch of factors there. One, it's a classic game that a lot of people remembered fondly, and a lot of people have old shabby copies of it or didn't get it. It's got updated order battle research. It's got updated mechanics. Bruce Maxwell, the designer, is incredibly enthusiastic about it, and that is contagious, and that spread to a bunch of people, including content creators like me and Mo and a few other people. So a lot of people, a lot of noisy people like me, were super excited about it. So that may have contributed, and I hope it did. I hope it does well for them. It is a really nice game, as far as I can tell so far. So I that's not review. That's my impression as of this moment. But I have seen nothing that disabuses me of that notion. We actually had like a point, I forget what point, some rules point that were like, I couldn't find it. We couldn't find it in the rule book. And then I thought to check the sequence of play. Is it there? There it was. So we have yet to not find a rule that we needed in a place that made sense. It is an 84-page rule book. So it is not a slender rule book, but it's not as complicated as that would suggest. All right, let's handle the Hoist the Signal for Close Action is a 1993 Rod Langton design. So that is not a module for the game called Close Action from Clash of Arms. Is that what we're saying? If so, and that means I am unfamiliar with it. Heart of Oak I have heard of, but it is miniatures rules, and therefore I am not interested in it. E4 Airman mentions the GMT sale that I believe we have adequately covered already. Julio Lopez says, can we contrast NATO versus MMP's Iron Curtain? Okay, so I think we did this last week too, but that's fine. So Iron Curtain is the standard combat series, which means it is a very, very simple rule set. It is an 8-page series rules and something like 8 or 12 pages or something like that of game-specific rules. So rules-wise, it is very light. It is very easy to play. It is, however, it ignores or abstracts a number of things like supply, for example. It has what I would characterize as basically no supply rules. There is an attempted justification of that in the designer's notes for Iron Curtain. And I am not saying that Carl is not justified in making that design decision. If that's not what he's interested in doing, then that's a fair call for the designer to make. The interesting thing about Iron Curtain is it is a Cold War in Europe sandbox. You get like 4 different dates that you can have the game take place at, from the late 40s to the 80s. And then you have a number of variations of different types of scenarios within those dates. So and it's SCS, so it should play pretty quickly. It's 1 map, 4 counter sheets. NATO is 2 maps and 3 counter sheets. Am I remembering? It has 4 counter sheets as well, but they're larger counters. And there's an ample supply of markers in there too. If I had to make a complaint, I'd say I wish some of the markers were clearer. I wish they would do things like say disrupted on them instead of just having like a picture of an explosion. That's my most serious complaint about NATO so far. Obviously, NATO with its 80-some page rulebook is a more detailed game. Okay. But it also gives you some flexibility in starting. So there's an 83, there's like 3 different starting dates, but they're all in the 80s. And then there's like 3 different situations for all 3 of those dates. So there's a strategic surprise scenario or setup, there's an extended build-up scenario, and there's the War of Nerves setup. Plus there's an introductory scenario, the unfortunately named Ball Tap scenario, which is actually what we're playing. You're going to get more detail in NATO, like a lot more detail in NATO, than you are in Iron Curtain. But Iron Curtain gives you the additional flexibility of having, scenarios set in the 40s and 50s, too. So it kind of depends. I mean, I think for a lot of gamers, the SCS game might be the better choice because it's so easy to play. But for like somebody who's really interested in the subject or normally leans into more complicated games, then I think NATO is the more obvious choice. I think both are solid. From where I come from, I had Iron Curtain and I don't have it anymore. My NATO is not going anywhere. Let me put it that way. I think I lean more into NATO than into Iron Curtain, which is not to be taken as an indictment of Iron Curtain. Greg Grant said he didn't love Iron Curtain. He thought you really couldn't get an offensive going as the Warsaw Pact. Warsaw Pact units are not strong enough to punch massive holes in exploit. That might be true. I didn't actually try to play it. Greg Grant mentions Under an Iron Sky. So that's another, I guess, a game that exists in that space. If by exists we mean that some people have it. Because you can't get it. It's out of print again, and you can't get it from the publisher, and it might get reprinted again, but who knows when that'll happen. That is a game that it basically exists in exactly the same theater as NATO, but it is more detailed even though it doesn't have a denser rule book than NATO does. I think NATO's a cleaner design and a better rule book. It's more complicated than NATO, and it's bigger too. It's like 4 or 5 maps or something like that. So it's there's a lot going on there. Plus, there's the two companion games, one of which is coming. Steve Dolges mentions the Third World War reprint from Compass, which might be an interesting comparison, but I've played the original. I don't believe that the Compass reprint will be that different. I think it will be a lot less different than NATO is from its original edition. And I can tell you that it is a less detailed design than NATO as well. But it's, again, at a bigger scale, right? You're going to play, it's probably 4 or 6 maps or some absurd size like that, as opposed to, and it's going to cover, like, most of Europe, as opposed to NATO, which covers basically Germany. E4 Airman mentions a copy of Red Storm. Mentions that he got a copy of Red Storm Rising by TSR. That is a game. I think the Hunt for Red October game is actually fairly well regarded. I don't really know anything about the Red Storm Rising. I know it doesn't normally go for that much money, so. Greg Grant mentions that the complaint with NATO is that the air war is too abstracted, which is they could have included some sort of air campaign. I won't argue with that. I think that's just a design decision that was made. It is a decision I do not have an issue with. After all, it is not a simulation of the air campaign. It's a simulation of the ground campaign. However, all that said, if you would like a more detailed air game than the Third World War series from upcoming from Compass, which I just said was less complicated, has got a more detailed air system than NATO has. And of course, the Next War series from GMT, which again I would put in a different category than NATO versus Warsaw Pact games, has a very detailed air system. The advanced game is mostly air system in those Next War games. Matt Taylor mentions a game like Twilight 2000. Of course, that's coming back out from Free League Publishing, which has done some nice stuff, but I'm not... My faith in... I did not get on that Kickstarter. I'd be delighted to be wrong, but from what I'm hearing so far, it's not going to be a good new take on the subject. All right. Kyle Reese mentions that Bruce wanted a one-sitting game. I think it's going to be a long sitting, but I will tell you this, and we started to see this even just doing the fumbling around we're doing. Once you have the game, once you know what you're doing, that game, NATO, that is, plays very quickly. I mean, we even started to see that as bad at it as we are. Now, one thing that I didn't want to talk about this week, but Under an Iron Sky is at a very different scale than NATO and the Third World War. So if you want a more a more operational game, then maybe Under an Iron Sky and its companion games are something you want to look at. Certainly, they sell like hotcakes for the couple hundred copies that they print. And evaporate instantaneously. So, okay. So, Matt Taylor's mentioning Fortress America, and I might have lost the thread on that one. So, lifestyle games. So let's actually shift into the topic, because I've got another 30 or so counters to clip here for this game, and then I'll organize them, and then we'll be done, and I'll just have time to talk. So I'm hearing a lot of good things about the Alien RPG, a game that I am not interested in any sense. But I have heard a lot of good things about it. All right, I want to answer a couple of these questions before we get to lifestyle games. So let's actually shift into the topic, because I've got another 30 or so counters to clip here for this game, and then I'll organize them, and then we'll be done, and I'll just have time to talk. So I'm hearing a lot of good things about the Alien RPG, a game that I am not interested in any sense. But I have heard a lot of good things about it. All right, I want to answer a couple of these questions before we get to lifestyle games. So GMT's Red Storm is one of those operational air games based on the Lee Brimacum Wood downtown system, and it's very detailed. Let me put it that way. It's less operational than I wanted it to be. Let me put it that way. I do still have it, despite having the idea in my head that I was going to get rid of it more than once. It's still here, and it may not go anywhere. I don't know yet. All right, I screwed something up. There's more yellow guys here, right? Maybe there isn't. Jeff Beeler asks, best GMT game in stock. Boy, I mean, if you ask me, I'll tell you what I think might be the best GMT game in stock. And, if you ask somebody else, you're going to get a completely different answer. And I'm going to probably give you a couple examples that I think are candidates for that, because I don't want to hop over to the GMT website and see what is actually in stock right now. One thing that I think is on the list of games that would have to be considered as best GMT game in stock would be, assuming it is still in stock, is Death Valley. It is a game about the Shenandoah Valley campaigns of 1862 and 1864. It is a wonderful package. Great battles of the American Civil War, so it's a relatively detailed system. So as long as you're comfortable with that, then I'd say that's a good target. Another game that I think provides, similarly provides tremendous value is the current edition of SPQR Deluxe, which contains something like 20 or something like that battles of the Roman Republican period. It is, again, a massive value package. If you are looking for something somewhat simpler, that and still is a Hex Encounter war game, then I'm going to say something like the Dark Summer is probably a really good choice, or Stalingrad 42, or Holland 44 if it's still available. I think it isn't, to be honest. So those are just some ideas of the things that I would look at when trying to compile a list of best GMT games that are in stock right at the moment. So lifestyle games, though, since we're let's at least lay some groundwork on this topic before we begin to drift again, because we will. What I mean by a lifestyle game, so I think a lot of people use that term as a pejorative. They mean, oh, that's a lifestyle game, meaning that if you play it, you are a loser who doesn't have a life outside of that game. And when I use the term lifestyle game, I do not mean that. What I mean is, let's actually pull my stream info panel up here, because I should be keeping at least a loose eye on it. What I mean by that is a game that is detailed enough, that is, I don't want to say detailed necessarily, because it doesn't have to be complicated, that is rich enough to be your entire hobby, to be satisfying if you didn't have any other war games to play. The obvious example in this space is ASL. It is a game that is, in many, often played by people who don't play any other war games. But if at the same time, let's say, somebody plays a lot of Commands and Colors, and that's the only war game that they play, but they go to a game club every weekend and they play Carcassonne and Terraforming Mars and all this other stuff, then I don't think that's a lifestyle game for them. That's got to be like the majority. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it's got to be the vast majority of the gaming that person does. And you can say that D&D is a lifestyle game. I've never played it like that personally, but I never loved D&D as such quite enough to dedicate myself to just D&D. I always wanted to play other stuff, and often did. I will have a picture of. Speaking of that this is relevant. I will have a picture of this once it is healed up and finished, and there's probably going to be at least one more session to finish it, by the way. So. In the meantime, if I showed it to you, it would look awfully red and puffy. So, in addition to the blood, which is, I haven't really noticed much in the last 6 hours or so, but it did quite a bit of seeping overnight. So, I mean, there's probably lifestyle video games too. Think about people that are still playing, and these people are still there, that are still playing EverQuest daily. There's a reason why that game's still around. There's some of those folks that are still playing it on a religious basis. World of Warcraft is like that too. There are people, despite all, which we are not going to talk about this, but despite all the scandal around Blizzard right now, there are people who just don't care. That's their hobby, is World of Warcraft, and they're not going to abandon it just because so and so said such and such happened at Blizzard, right? So, and maybe we'll talk more about video games later because I have stuff to say about that, but I mean, it doesn't have to be war games, right? It can be role-playing games or whatever it is. It's a single game. There's probably people that play, in fact, there probably are people that play Terraforming Mars like a lifestyle game. I didn't think Terraforming Mars was that good, but because I've played it a couple times, and it's fine. It's fine. There are folks that play 18xx as a lifestyle too, actually. Not necessarily a single 18xx game, but the 18xx family of related games. There's folks that do that like every week, and that's all they do. So that's what I mean by a lifestyle game. And again, ASL is an obvious example, but I think there's people that play World in Flames like that. There's probably people that play a World at War like that. And I can understand that because that's a beast. There might be people that, speaking of the Lord of the Rings living card game, that could be. We tried that, and maybe we were doing it wrong. That's very plausible, but I thought it kind of sucked, actually, which is disappointing because I bought the set and a couple expansions for it, and I'm like, this is kind of a turd. Maybe we're doing it wrong. I don't know. And I never circled back around to make sure we weren't doing it wrong. Somebody's got 2580 hours of Civ 6. Whew, okay. Now, but that said, I have never been a lifestyle gamer, right? I have never, and this is just me, right? This is a different approach to gaming in general, whatever kind of games, not just war games. Some people like to have a game that they play. But nobody's going to do that with Carcassonne, right? Nobody's going to say, "Oh, we have to play a very serious Carcassonne tournament this weekend." I mean, I don't think anybody's doing that. That's just that game is too casual. I don't think anybody is dedicating themselves to that specifically. And that's, again, nothing wrong with Carcassonne. It's a fine game. And I could be snarky and make jokes about it, but let's assume that I've done that and move on. Stephen Reynolds, I might know one of those folks might actually be a buddy of mine. That makes his own 18xx games. Yeah, those guys are real serious, actually. I'm about to clip the last counter. DCS World, which is, I believe, a flight simulator of some kind. That's super hardcore. Even the Microsoft Flight Simulator is probably pretty hardcore. And I think a lot of online video games can be like that. Certainly Call of Duty's probably like that, right? But the reason this is possible is that these games have enough to them to keep you busy, playing and engaged because it's giving you interesting results. In the absence of other games, right? All right, let's do this AG business here. AG. A lot of Little Russian, contrary to what you might expect, a lot of Little Russian formations here. This is all the counters, though. This is old enough that the clipping was a little rough. It's possible the dies in my clipper are a bit on the dull side, too. Terrence mentions that Go is a lifestyle game. Sure, in that sense, so is chess, which I know has already been mentioned. So I will agree that it is, by my definition. Which, of course, you know, I could be full of it like anybody else. But now where the AG units go? Alright, we are done. I'll show you another little trick here. Cutthroat Carcassonne Grognard Edition. I like that idea. Magic the Gathering could certainly... Pokemon could certainly be lifestyle games. EVE Online, absolutely. I've never been able to stick with that for very long. Sometime in 2020, I played... I think my longest consecutive stint of EVE Online, which went for about 2 months, maybe 3 months. After that, I couldn't really do it anymore. Doug mentions he's in under 1,000 hours of Civ 6. I've played Civ 6 for less than an hour. I have it. Wait a minute. I'm not sure I've ever even installed it, actually. I got it during the Epic Games Store's one of their freebie giveaways, and I'm not sure I've ever installed it. I have played less than an hour of Civ 5, and I've played probably 6 or 8 hours of Civ 4. I played the absolute ass off of Civ 2 back in the day, but I have not played any of those games at all. Civ 3 was... I think it was Civ 3 that was not very good. I have not gotten into any of those games since then to the same extent. I have played plenty of 4X games. Just not the Civ games. Alright, we are going... These are sleeved. Do I want to keep them in the sleeves? I guess the answer to whether I want to keep them in the sleeves is the answer to do they fit in the box, which I guess they do. So I got these silicone hair bands for cards that I think are a little less prone to damage your cards than the standard rubber bands. And they're definitely less prone to fossilizing. Stephen Reynolds mentions that he played EQ, EQ2, and WoW. I was not into EQ during its heyday. I was still thinking, you know, why don't you folks just play D&D? Which actually I was playing at the time. It was one of my rare periods of playing AD&D 2nd Edition. Really the only extended period when I played AD&D 2nd Edition. And I put these back in here too. We were playing a Birthright campaign at the time. And then when WoW came out right around the same time, within a couple of months of EQ2, and it buried EQ2 instantly. I played quite a lot of both games. I probably played more World of Warcraft than EQ2, and I got into both of those about a year or two after they came out. I think in the case of about 2 years, because I think I got in right after Burning Crusade came out, or right before. And EQ2 has a lot going for it. I actually reinstalled it relatively recently and logged in, looked around, and was like, I can't do it, and uninstalled it. Its gameplay, I think, is just not fun. I think that's my problem with it. It's got a lot of features. It's feature-rich. It's got great housing. It's got great crafting. It's got a bunch of cool stuff. But the combat sucks. Much worse than WoW. And WoW doesn't have the best combat either. Anyway. Findle70 mentions you need more content coming out fairly regularly to qualify as a lifestyle game. Maybe. Maybe not. Certainly, Whiff did that when they had their endless stream of shit in flames expansions. that bloated the game up to beyond recognition. That's why I sold it, because I was unhappy with all the bloat. I know Civ 5, a lot of people dislike Civ 5 because it went to a hex grid, which is obviously no problem for me. There is a YouTube video from CCP Grey called "Hexagons Are the Bestigons," so watch that and you'll agree. Particularly like the Avalon Hill baseball. So the ones I played were the Status Pro baseball and football, and those were actually kind of fun. I never got super into sports games of any kind, but those I did play, and I liked them both. They were in 3-inch boxes too, which is, other than those two games, I'm not sure. Maybe Status Pro basketball too. I'm not sure I can think of any examples from Avalon Hill. Jeff mentions he played Red Orchestra Darkest Hour for over 1,000 hours. I have one of the Red Orchestra titles, and I forget which one, and I never played it very much. Block Oddity mentions, does drinking and clipping start as a lifestyle? I guess it does as of December 2020. Shane W. mentions Star Citizen. So I don't necessarily think you need to spend a bundle of money on a lifestyle game. I mean, maybe you do, but you can do that on any hobby you want. A little bit more. I'd show you the card that the bands came on if I hadn't thrown it away already, but I didn't think that I was going to have to make a recommendation on that. Stigler says he's more likely to call a staff ace a 2-9 pitcher than an ace pitcher. Stephen Reynolds says he was rating in EQ2 for a while. Yeah, I mean, I never really got into the rating thing in any game. I did raid a couple of times in WoW, and that was it. And this was during Lich King was when I was doing it. So Cal Reese mentions that one major ingredient of a lifestyle game is a dedicated, close-knit community. Yes, but your close-knit community might just be your group. I mean, maybe your group is enough. If you have enough people who are dedicated enough to it to play it all the time, then it can work. You don't necessarily need hundreds or dozens of people. Half dozen people is probably sufficient. Agri Day mentions Total War, which is, I assume you're talking about the video game series, which is a game series I was super into at one point, and boy, it just ended up, I evolved away from it, let me put it that way. Mo mentioned Stratomatic, which is, of course, like the definitive, like, board baseball thing. I've never played that. That's still an active thing, though, I can tell you that. I am not Okay, so I'm from Cleveland. So you can imagine that folks in Cleveland who are into sports either decide that they're going to double down on it and become psychotic Cleveland fans, or their interest withers away, just like the playoff hopes of the various Cleveland teams. And I fall into the latter camp. So if I seem apathetic towards sports, that's why. Played the hell out of Tecmo Bowl on one of the old consoles, actually. I loved that thing, and I was a big enough NFL guy that I was like buying the statistics manuals every year, and it just they just killed me. I just couldn't take it anymore. Those poor Browns people. Yes, I know they did okay this year. Block Oddity mentioned Eclipsing Peloponnesian War. Aren't those pre-clipped? Are you talking about the new Peloponnesian War, or are we talking about Epic of the Peloponnesian War, or are we talking about the old Victory Games Peloponnesian War? There's a new one from GMT, I think, is pre-rounded counters. I will agree with Kyle that if you are not playing EVE Online as a lifestyle game, you are basically going to either lose interest very quickly, or you are going to consign yourself to a long career of casual suck. Escape from Tarkov. That's supposed to be good. I've never played that. It might be that the EQ2 rating, or dungeons. I never really did any dungeons. I might have done one or two dungeons in EQ2. It may be that that's interesting. but I didn't get to see enough of it. Agri Day asks if Fields of Glory is the new Total War. I would say no. Field of Glory is a game that is much more similar to Commands and Colors Ancients than it is anything else. I don't think it occupies the same space as Total War. Oh, Black Oddity. Yes, the old Victory Point games. Victory Games game. Okay, so yeah, you need to clip that. But that's the same game as the new one, and it's a classic too. Oh, Freedom of the Galaxy is not that big a project. To play the whole grand campaign is a bit of a time sink, but it's probably 20 hours or so. It's not. That's not serious. Cleveland sports live in the past to have the best life. Sadder than Detroit fans. I don't know about that. I think that the teams are sadder than Detroit teams, but the Detroit fans are even sadder than the Cleveland fans. I forget what Glen is Scottish for, but it is not peat. Most of the Glens are Highland or Speysides, which are not known for their peat content. Glenfiddich, so there's a bit of a fuzzy border between Highland and Speysides. The Speyside is basically the Spey River basin where there's a lot of distilleries, but that is in the Highland region, so there's a lot of overlap. But Highland is a big region that has a lot of different components. You can get Glendronach here, which is Highland, completely different drinking experience than, say, Oban or Talisker, which is technically Highland. At some point, we can talk about the Scottish whiskey regions and why there are 5 but should be 6 and all that. Highly recommend a comedy series of videos on YouTube called Pure Michigan, by the way. Cal mentions that there also can be lifestyle genres. That's true. There are people who are simply only interested in World War II, or who are only interested... I'm going to say that the vast majority of people who are only interested in a specific period without necessarily being limited to a specific game are probably going to... World War II is that period. But there's probably a few Civil War people too. I mean, hell, 2020 was like the year of American Civil War for me, so I played a ton of American Civil War games. I picture Glen as being some kind of wooded valley of some kind, but that might be... I do not know if that is accurate, or if I am just misremembering it, or if I'm just full of it, which is very plausible. I know of nobody whose lifestyle genre is Napoleonics, unless it is miniatures, Napoleonic miniatures. Then yes, then I can see it. But man, that is a tough road to hoe, as we say, when we say it right. Is Napoleonic miniatures, because you got so many different kinds of uniforms and all that stuff. So I was thinking about the subject of solitaire, like dedicated solitaire designed games that could be lifestyle games, and I think there are relatively few of them. Maybe Ambush is one. Maybe therefore Combat from Compass. Maybe. Other than that, I think the solitaire game that I've seen that has the best chance of being a really lifestyle game is probably Field Commander Napoleon from DVG, which is a wonderful game. There's a lot to it. I think it could keep you busy for a long time. Also, maybe somebody mentioned what's a damn card game called? The Legion of Honor. Yes. So maybe, yeah. I mean, you can, but I mean, it's a lifestyle game from the standpoint of the participants, not of the character. I played euchre when I was in college the first time a lot exclusively. Maybe Fields of Fire. I mean, there's a couple different Fields of Fire games out now, so maybe. For those who Narrow Valley, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. The Warfighter series. So do we consider the Warfighter series one thing, or do we consider it 3 or 4 different things? Because I'd be inclined to consider it 3 or 4 different things. Because there's a modern version and a World War II version and a World War II in the Pacific version and a fantasy version now. So I haven't played any of them. They're supposed to be very good. I didn't have any water. I meant to get some water. It has been a disorganized week. Magic Realm, yeah, I don't think so. And here's why I say that. I'm not convinced that there were all that many people that actually played Magic Realm at any point. It's got an infamously bad rule book. And is super complicated, and I think anybody that did that did it as a novelty, either because they were a wargamer and it was from Avalon Hill, or it was because they were fantasy role players and it was a board game version of a fantasy role-playing game. Patrick, the new job is, I would characterize it as stressful, but, you know, at least it's worth my hours. So Jeff Beeler mentions Stephen King's novella Hearts in Atlantis. I mean, okay, there are certainly people who have done that with various things. I don't know about Hearts, but so I did remember basically correctly then about the definition of Glen. So that's cool. I think it actually says on the Glenlivet bottle that it means Valley of the Deer, or Glenfiddich, that is. If I had previously said, by the way, that there were only 3 lowland distilleries, that was incorrect. There's a ton, a lot of which have popped up in the last 15 to 20 years. But there's definitely only 2 that I have ever seen in Ohio. And I haven't seen Glenkinchie in 10 years, so. Jason Williams says that Mage Knight is more or less Magic Realm, but actually playable. I've never played Mage Knight. I actually have some of the figures for it, I think I gave them away to, like, the local WizKids demo coordinator, because I wasn't using them, and he could give them away as prizes. I had a box of them that somebody gave me at one point. Glendronach is what we are drinking this evening. Another one I'd like to... Apparently, Binny's doesn't ship to Ohio. But at some point, we're going to have to do a field trip down to Kentucky to buy Scotch. But if I'm doing that, then I'm walking out of there with at least 4 bottles of Scotch. So, and it will be easy to find 4 bottles of Scotch that I cannot find in Ohio at the place I would go to in Kentucky. So I've been playing probably the game since I stopped playing WoW seriously. And I, take seriously as I was not a lifestyle, let me put it that way. This was in the Lich King era, so years and years and years ago. I have dabbled in WoW a couple other times, never for more than maybe a month or maybe 2. I did that right at the end of the Battle for Azeroth before the latest expansion came out, and was pretty happy with the new leveling scheme and all that, and was having fun with it. And then the expansion came out, and it was shit. So I enjoyed the leveling part of it, but then the post leveling part of it was just garbage. And I over the span of about 2 weeks, my desire to play it completely evaporated. So. Didn't do any of that for a while, and then I started fooling around with the Elder Scrolls Online again, which I'm nominally still playing. Haven't really played it in about a week because I've been playing New World, which is the beta for Amazon's new MMORPG. I like it a lot. It is, funnily enough, no, I don't think the SCA is, because a ton of people that I know in the SCA also play things like D&D, or even Rollmaster. Actually, one of the knights up in Cleveland, back home, has been running Rollmaster for decades. So I was enjoying it's either closed now or going to close in a couple hours, the beta, and then the thing launches on either August 31st or September 1st of New World, and I enjoyed it a lot. So I got into the beta by ordering it. It's $40. You buy it on Steam, and it's one of those nice Steam launchers where you just launch it and that's it. You don't have to sign in or remember a password or anything like that. Douglas Gerhardt mentions the Jour de Gloire series from Vivictus. I think mostly Vivictus. There's been a couple of games that have been released by other publishers as well. There's a lot of battles in that series. However, there's also a lot of... they're mostly magazine games in different magazine issues, so tracking them all down, or even a meaningful percentage of them down, would be actually quite a bit of work. There is one on the Battle of Issy in a recent issue of C3I, which probably is still available. So if you want to try the system, that's where to go. Also, and I didn't know this till I found it out a couple of months ago, the Jour de Gloire system, Frederick Bay borrowed that system from Richard Berg's Triumph and Glory and made, I guess, a decent number of modifications to it. So if you think of it as kind of a Richard Berg system, I think it in that context it makes it I think that makes it more appealing for me. Let me put it that way, because I'm a Berg fan, even though I don't necessarily like all of his games, because he did release some things that were maybe not completely thought through. But there's a lot of good Richard Berg games that I have really enjoyed too. Somebody, it might be Claystone, is playing Campaign for North Africa and posting his results on Facebook, and he speaks very highly of it. I think he's insane. So Star Trek Frontiers, that's pretty much a Click's version of Star Trek. Not super into that, haven't played it. Daniel Berger says, is Traveler about to become my new lifestyle? Man, I've been a Traveler lifestyler for decades, but everybody around me is not. So, and now it's a matter of, huge time pressures that I'm just not able to... We are still playing, we just haven't played, I think, in 2 weeks. I haven't played in 2 weeks. So I will say this on New World. It's... they did like a public test of it last year, and they've made a lot of changes since then. So if you're watching a video of it, make sure it's video from like the last couple of weeks. Berg versus Borg. We should actually, that would make a pretty good show topic, would be Berg versus Borg. I'd have to do actual research for that, to be honest. But I'm on the Berg side of that, by the way, even though I like the Borg designs. I mean, has Richard Borg done anything besides Commands and Colors? It's possible that he has. But that's definitely what I think of when I think of Richard Borg. But when I think of Richard Berg, I think of this enormous tapestry of 40 or plus years of games on completely different subjects and widely varying scales, and he ranged across literally all of human history. Whereas Richard Borg is trying to do that with just one system. So I do have... There's not going to be an unboxing, but I'd like to get a video out on it. The new Deep Night Revel... Well, not new, because it's been out for ages. The Deep Night Revelation campaign stuff for Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition. I have it in my hands. It's very nice. I'm glad I finally got it. It was kept in customs for months. I did get in on the... and I will say that if you're into the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition, which is the version of Traveler that I currently am recommending, do get in on the Kickstarters if you have any interest in that material at all, because if you have to buy it separately after the fact, it's going to cost you an absolutely ridiculous amount of money. That was definitely going to be true with... It's going to cost you about $350 to buy that Deep Night Revelation material separately. I got it for like, I don't know, 120 bucks or something like that when I through the Kickstarter. So do get in on the Kickstarters. The last one was the Mercenary Kickstarter, which I got to tell you, I was not super impressed with. Mongoose has always been a prolific company for those games that they support, though. They've always had a lot of support. They did it for the previous edition of Traveller 2. I hope that everybody in that relationship is happy, because as far as I'm concerned, I would love to see Mongoose Traveller 2nd Edition stuff coming out for the next 15 years. So... I don't have everything for Mongoose Traveller 2nd, but I have a lot of it. I'm missing some of the more new stuff. I should probably try to get caught up with that, but there's a lot to, there's a lot to do. We are still, penciling in this kitchen reno, which is going to happen, we think, in October. So we're probably going to start spending money on that in the next week or two. Gloomhaven, yeah, that's a... Jason says there's not enough content there for a lifestyle game, and he's probably right, strictly speaking, but there's a lot in that box, I can tell you that. Which Battle of Britain is that? There's multiple games with that title. When I think of the game called Battle of Britain, I think of the old TSR game. Jeff Beeler, so and I've talked about this in Traveler videos. Jeff says all you need is the 3 little black books, which Mark will sell you on a CD, or you can find for free sometimes. That's true, but it's not what to look for. Go to DriveThruRPG and look for Traveler Starter Edition, and every time, it's not always free, but every time I've checked it in the last 2 years, it's been free. That is the same rule system, within within the error bars, as the 3 little black books, in a somewhat friendlier format, and lightly rewritten so that it's easier to deal with. It is the same game. There's a couple minor differences, but nothing big. And that's what I point people to, in part because it's free. So... John Longshore says that they should combine all of the Traveller adventures into one volume. So, maybe we don't all know, but there's a shitload of Traveller adventures, and rights would be an issue, because a lot of the classic Traveller adventures were not produced by GDW, even though they were written by, say, the Keith brothers, who were also publishing stuff through GDW. I'm not only talking about the stuff that they did for GDW, but the stuff they did for FASA specifically, and for Game Lords. The Keith brothers did an enormous amount of work in Traveller back in that period. Tony's Board Life is here. Thanks for stopping by. So, I mean, we've played the Blitzkrieg Legend twice at this point, so I get my money's worth out of any OCS title. Let me put it that way. Mike Anthony asks about, were any of the Judges Guild Traveller stuff good? I think the answer to that is no. They did, I think, 4 sectors: Crucis Margin, Glimmer for Reaches, Lay Sector, and Gateway Sector, I think. And they're all really pretty sloppy. I've seen a few of the adventures. I have a fair amount of the Judges Guild stuff, and the printing quality was abominably low. I mean, ink smears off on your fingers. It's on pretty much newsprint. I think of the major third-party publishers, you can hear that whining. It's one of our cats, by the way. Of the major third-party publishers producing Traveller stuff in the GDW era, Judges Guild, I think, had the lowest standards. And I would say Game Lords, or I think FASA had the highest FASA did some really good stuff. Game Lords also did some really good stuff. Who was the other one that was doing stuff? I have a lot of this, so, but I can't reach it, so I'm not pulling it down right now. So Digest Group is a different era. They did start doing stuff in the classic era, but they're much better known for Mega Traveler. And in fact, it was them that did Mega Traveler for GDW. It was published by GDW, but it was put together by Digest Group. So Mega Traveler is Classic Traveler. I mean, it's hard to see this, but if you look at like late era Classic Traveler, right before Mega Traveler came out, and you look at all the supplements and all the rules expansions that they have done, and you put all that in one game, what comes out of that is something that looks a lot like Mega Traveler. Now they did rework some of the systems, but it's very much a Classic Traveler Second Edition. That adds a lot of complexity because it adds a lot of the optional things. So, boy, this is good. I'll be buying more of this at some point. So, 2300 AD is not part of the Traveler universe. So the Little Black Books didn't really have a built-in universe as such. There certainly was an implied universe, and as they started doing material for the game because it was popular, they started pulling stuff in. They started with the old Imperium game, and it got built off of that. So and many Traveler core books don't have much on the Traveler universe, which kind of developed somewhat in parallel with the game system. There was a product released. I couldn't tell you the date offhand, but I have a video on this if you want to go look at that. They released a product called Traveler 2300, which doesn't use the Traveler system. It uses the Twilight 2000 system, which does share some family resemblance to Traveler, but it's not mechanically similar particularly. It isn't in the Traveler universe. It's in a harder science fiction universe that is maybe less amenable to ongoing play than the Traveler universe is. It is an interesting universe, nevertheless, and they later realized their mistake with branding and redid it as a sort of second edition, although it's exactly the same, except it's 2300 AD instead of Traveler 2300, and some very minor adjustments were made. Right around that time, Cyberpunk started becoming very popular, so they started introducing cyberpunk elements to it, which hadn't been in the original game. So there's a lot of like the beanstalk of Earth, the slums at the beanstalk's base, and that kind of thing in the late 2300 AD supplements. They did do a 2300 AD book and a couple of supplements for Mongoose Traveler First Edition, and they are redoing it for Mongoose Traveler Second Edition. I like the second edition better between the two editions of Mongoose Traveler for its greater detail in character creation without going overboard like you would if you like used the first Mongoose edition and used all the expansion life paths and stuff like that. I could feel this leaking. I've heard a lot of good things about Netrunner, actually, and I've never played any version of it. I have everything ever released for 2300 AD, except for the Mongoose stuff. Everything that GDW ever did for it, anyway. Traveler 2300 also had the French in space. Third French, or fourth, whatever it was, French Empire out in space. Was a major thing. Interestingly, a lot of additional astronomical objects have been discovered within, say, 50 parsecs of Earth. One of the notable things about Traveler 2300 was the star map, the real space star map, which was based on actual astronomical data at the time. There's so much more data now, and it actually breaks their faster than light travel. So they actually had to keep the old star chart, or it ruins the universe. So that's amusing. So Looks like we topped 100 at one point, but we're at about 88 right now, according to YouTube. So it's all good, and we have about 40 more minutes. I've heard good things about Netrunner. I wouldn't mind trying it at some point, but it's one of those things where I'm not going to buy it until I've tried it. Stephen Reynolds asks if I play Traveler to Travelin' Man by Ricky Nelson, which is a great song, actually. I actually really like Ricky Nelson, believe it or not. But no, that has never occurred to me. I did get in on the recent Call of Cthulhu Kickstarter, where it's a new edition of, or a reprint of. Let's try and fix this. That's better. It's a reprint of the first edition of, or second edition of Call of Cthulhu. A lot of people remember Top Secret pretty fondly, but frankly, the Victory Games James Bond game was a far more innovative game than Top Secret. There are people who do play. I've seen some articles on this recently. Apparently, the number one Western tabletop RPG in Japan is and has been for ages Call of Cthulhu, much more popular than D&D. So it's one of, I think, relatively few tabletop RPGs that are lifestyle games that aren't D&D. We don't normally play music while gaming. I can tell you that. If I was when I did my Traveler thing like last year sometime, I did put some like low-key sort of ambient electronic stuff on in the background. Brian Eno, I think I had some Eno on that list, actually. The Morrow Project, which is, they've tried to revive that several times, I can tell you that. I'll put a little more water in this, actually. Jeff is correct. So apparently, they had this sort of contemporary events simulator thing happening at GDW called The Game or The Great Game, and they've never released rules for it, and I suspect that there's rules were never written down because it was mostly run by moderators, so it is a Kriegspiel in this respect. And they basically extrapolated some future history, and they got the 2300 AD background, or the Twilight 2000 background out of it, and then from that, they extrapolated forward to 2300 AD using those rules and about 20 players, and ended up with the 2300 AD universe. So it is the same universe a couple hundred years later of Twilight 2000. So, Boot Hill. I think Boot Hill was a terrible RPG, to be honest. I think Boot Hill, and I had it as a kid, and we liked it at the time. But it's basically a gunfight simulator. It's really, it's not necessarily a terrible game, but it's a terrible RPG. Like a couple of things that TSR put out in the very early days, which Boot Hill is one of them. Which aren't really RPGs, even though they were marketed that way. Dawn Patrol was another one. Now, on the other hand, Gangbusters, I think, holds up extraordinarily well today. I actually still have Gangbusters, and I think it might be the best game TSR ever did. I think it's maybe that's Marvel Superheroes, actually. Super innovative game, too, Marvel Superheroes. Not as innovative as the James Bond game, but see, as a game master, I find managing the music to be distracting, so I tend not to do it. Either that, or it's on nice and low in the background, so I can just ignore it. Or like if you're doing one shots, I've seen it employed in one shots. very effectively a number of times. Gamma World was a legit RPG. Of course, Gamma World evolved sort of out of Metamorphosis Alpha 2. So, the two were explicitly linked later on. But there's a lot of the same sort of style in Metamorphosis Alpha versus Gamma World. On Guard, yeah, that's another one that is sort of an interesting demi-RPG. You can get a print-on-demand version of that from Amazon for something like $20. By the way, it's an interesting piece. I think it's the only GDW RPG that I've never owned, I think. Yeah, I think that is true. I've had all the other ones. I think Stars Without Number is Space D&D, and I don't have a use for Space D&D. That doesn't mean that there aren't some interesting ideas in Stars Without Number. There are, but I think it's Space D&D, and I would much rather pick a dedicated science fiction system and not D&D in space. That sounds dismissive, and I don't mean it to be, but I'm dismissing it out of hand as Space D&D. I don't think the D&D system is good enough to be flexible enough to handle different types of genres. And that's what it is. It's Space D&D. So I long ago ran out of patience with people adapting D&D to different things. And again, a lot of those games have interesting things in them, but like the foundational basis of play is D&D, and I think the dynamic works poorly for things that aren't D&D. I mean, I think D&D is a very poor general fantasy simulator. It is very good at simulating D&D. It's its own thing, and it's very good at that, but it's not good at doing other things, and it's not particularly flexible. So. I mean, the same logic applies to Starfinder, except that I'm not aware that Starfinder has any interesting ideas in it. Maybe it does, but I haven't really looked at it. Well, so there have been attempts to make Traveller into a fantasy game, actually. And how... I haven't really looked particularly closely at those, so I don't really consider myself qualified to comment on it. But... is education a useful stat in a fantasy game? Maybe, but maybe not. Just in the same sense that wisdom is probably not a particularly useful stat in a science fiction game. Space Opera was clumsy, but it was a legit science fiction game. They did some pretty good supplementary material for that too, actually. A lot of which you could still get from them. My fantasy... So, fantasy RPG system. So, I'm going to give you my today answer. Do I have it here? Well, sort of. RuneQuest 6th edition. Available from the design mechanism as Mithras for complicated licensing reasons. It's the same game with very minor modifications. That is my fantasy RPG of choice right now if I were playing a fantasy RPG. I have a high opinion of Against the Dark Master. I've got some video on the pipeline of that. It's just, things came together and the timing was poor. That is basically a modernized MERP, Middle-earth role-playing, and therefore a modernized, simplified Rolemaster, which appeals to me because I liked Rolemaster back in the day. Thousand Suns is broken. I'm very excited. It's James Malaszewski's game. There's some interesting things in there. It's a really nice streamlining of Traveller ideas, but the core mechanic is broken. I think if you look at the core mechanics, you'll find problems with it. I have played Starfire, the accountant's game. Why is Starfire the accountant's game? So if we're talking about Starfire like the Starship Combat game, it's extremely simple. I don't think it's very accountant-y at all. On the other hand, if you're playing like Imperial Starfire, Galactic Starfire, or the campaign game, or whatever it's called, that is super accountant-y. So I won't argue with that. Carl, I was just talking about somebody, with somebody about Burning Wheel on Facebook today. And I will tell you what I told them, because they were having problems with it. They're like, hey, we tried playing Burning Wheel, we hit these snags. There's a lot of really clever ideas in Burning Wheel, and it is a very influential game system. The rulebook is among the worst RPG books I have ever seen, and here's why. It doesn't explain to you how to actually play the game. It explains how a bunch of the mechanics work and gives you no guidance whatsoever on how you're actually supposed to employ those things in play. Its examples are nebulous and ill-explained. It is an easy rulebook to read, but it does a bad job of teaching you the game, and that is a huge problem. I did play Burning Wheel with the designer and did not feel like I understood what he was trying to do until that happened. So, I was aware that David Weber was involved in Starfire. In fact, a bunch of like the campaign books, there was not that many of them. There was 2 or 3 different campaign books of like sci-fi campaigns using the Starfire rules. Those were written by David Weber, and they're super readable too. Worthwhile just for the reading. So, Call of Cthulhu uses the RuneQuest system. That is the basic role-playing system, or the D100 system it's sometimes called, from Chaosium. RuneQuest was the first game that used it, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. Call of Cthulhu, most famously, but there was Superworld, and there was the various Michael Moorcock games, including Stormbringer and Elric. Pendragon is actually a derivative of that, with the numbers retuned to use a D20 instead of percentile, but it's essentially the same system in every other respect. That's a misstatement. There's a lot of differences in Pendragon, but the core mechanisms are all the same. It's just that it's on a D20 instead of a D100. I do have. Is it here actually? No, it isn't. I have the BRP hardcover that they did at some point. Antoil asks about Eclipse Phase. I've flipped through Eclipse Phase. It looks neat. It's a post-human sci-fi RPG. It looks neat. I haven't played it. Steve Reynolds asked about High Frontier. I guess you could consider it a lifestyle game. I consider High Frontier to be not worth the trouble. I think people try to play it because they think there's some grand and sweeping thing in the design, and I think it's not really there. I think the fact that it isn't there is obfuscated by the complicated rules and poor rulebook. I think there's better games on the subject. And I'm not familiar with any of his other designs. High Frontier is the only one I've played. A lot of gifted artists had severe problems. Yeah, so I think Doug has it right. I think the way the sequencing was that they released RuneQuest, and then a couple of years later they released. What was it called? Was it called? There was a boxed set, which included a basic role-playing book, and then a Magic World, a Super World, and some other world, and it was sort of a generic type of thing. And I think that might even predate Call of Cthulhu, and pretty much everything else that they did post-dates that set. Worlds of Wonder, that is right. There's definitely people who are lifestyle Settlers of Catan players. But Catan has like a huge flow of stuff coming out too, right? I mean, at one point I was at Origins and there was a huge Settlers of Catan presence. I'm going to call it Settlers of Catan. But where they had a Catan catalog. This was like right after they had split off into the Catan the publisher. and there's a whole catalog of like a 60-page illustrated catalog of just Catan stuff. There's actually, I from memory, I could swear there's a product called Rickshaws of Catan, and you could buy that. So there's like an endless array of expansions that you can have. I did have one of the Terran Trade Authority books as a kid and liked it, but I only had one, and there was actually, I was going to say, there's somebody did an RPG based on that. Now, is that the Omni game system that came out from the Talislanta people? Because that was an interesting system. Stuff was happening so fast back then that it's going to be difficult to sequence it. You're going to look dates up, and you're going to see that all these products came out in 1981 or something like that. That is a problem you have with, and in fact, it's a thing that causes friction sometimes. Tell Kent St. Andre that Tunnels and Trolls is the third role-playing game ever released, and he'll get pissed. So, there is a Star Trek Catan, yes. No interest in that whatsoever. In fact, I played Starfarers of Catan once and found it pretty uninteresting. But I believe the current edition of it is different than the one I played. I don't think Axis and Allies is a lifestyle game. I've never seen people play. Maybe they are actually. Somewhere on YouTube, there's some video of a fella who built a custom table for Axis and Allies. So if anybody is an Axis and Allies player, it's that person. I think Call of Cthulhu came out in about 82, 83. That sounds right. I actually can't that easily pull it off a shelf because it's behind a bunch of other stuff. Including Indian Ocean region and war in Europe and all this other stuff. So let's see what this says. This says corrected Call of Cthulhu's copyright 1981, which says to me that the first edition came out in 1981, which is right around the same time that BRP came out, but I would not swear to the sequencing of those things without verifying that. Now this is, I think, edition 5.5, 5.6. I think 5.5 might look exactly the same, and I kept this one because I like the cover. It's a cool cover. But I, of course, have the current 7th edition in the fancy slipcase. I think I put that on video at one point. So BRP was sold separately much later. I have the book, so it was a big, perfect bound hardcover, and I think there was a softcover version. But that was like in the late 90s or early 2000s or something like that. Might even have been the 2010s, actually. But this was not in the 80s or even probably in the 90s. And it's a pretty different product, actually, at that point. I migrated all of the excess BRP stuff upstairs because I don't have room for it down here. But latest arrivals include Pulp Cthulhu and Classic Fantasy for Mithras, which basically is the use Mithras as your D&D emulator. There were things in that book that I wanted to have. So, Shane, thanks for stopping by. We'll be here next week with a new title, a new topic, and a new game too, and probably a new bottle of Scotch. Unless we circle back to one of the old ones. I might circle back to that Strath, whatever this stuff is from Colorado. Stranahan's, because I would like to get rid of it. Or maybe to the Ohio wheat whiskey. And I'm not throwing it out. I'm going to drink it. But it's good. I just don't have an endless array of places to put bottles. So, 1980 Chaos. This is per Jeff. Chaosium officially incorporated. That year, basic role-playing came out. These formed the basis of many of Chaosium's later D100. Yes, but they did products that, regardless of whether they officially incorporated in 1980, they did products as early as 1978 that I could think of offhand. RuneQuest, second edition RuneQuest came out in 78. So, before they incorporated, that it was all laid down. I hate to say this because there's errors in it, but Designers and Dragons by Shannon Appelkline is probably the best source for this early RPG history. If you want a D&D specifically, then Playing at the World by John Peterson is a better guide. And that's actually a really interesting book because that discusses in depth the wargaming roots of RPGs. I don't remember that they sold the BRP booklet separately at the time. Maybe they did. I don't know. Definitely the BRP booklet. It's not even a booklet. It's a book. It's a huge, thick book. That I have was much, much later. I suspect that Jeff is cutting and pasting these from an online source. Well, we have established that I think at least that Call of Cthulhu is a 1981 release. So, these came a while ago and I really got them going to put away, and I've screwed this up. The Kickstarter was interesting because included in that Kickstarter is a bunch of the old supplements, the original supplement line for Call of Cthulhu, which included some interesting things. Put that there for now, so it looks decorative at least. I haven't had a weekly RPG until this Traveler thing started in years, so... and that's just, I had gone back to school and was working full-time and going to school full-time, and I did not have time for gaming. I barely had time for 3 hours of sleep a night. So I had some games happening when those things started to occur, and those games went away. But then when things started to open up again after I graduated, it was wargaming that I got back into rather than RPGs. For whatever reason, I mean, I didn't have a wargaming group, but I had RPG people that I could have hooked up with. So I'd have had a Traveler game going last year if it hadn't been for COVID. So interesting. So, Doug mentions COC 1981 won the H.G. Wells Best RPG for 1981. I think I remember hearing that as well. Hard to keep track of individual award winners from that period, though. We had played throughout the 90s. I think our game was Rollmaster primarily. In the 2000s, my game I played primarily was Ars Magica, and other stuff in both decades, of course. And then in the 2000s, around 2015 was when I came down here and went back to school, and at that point, gaming ceased to occur. At some point, I'm probably going to have to bite the bullet and have a difficult topic. And Lovecraft is one of them, one of the difficult topics. Somebody mentioned on, I forget who this was, some social media, that it's like Lovecraft stuff once you kind of read some of the subtext and realize where Lovecraft is coming from on some of that material, it's just, subtext I didn't catch when I first read things like The Shadow over Innsmouth in the 80s or whatever that was. It sounds about right. I didn't text that it's about miscegenation, right? It's about, mixed breeding, and that being to Lovecraft the ultimate horror. To me, that's actually makes the whole thing rather dull. It's like, this is your cosmic horror? Is that, fear of white people and black people getting together? Really? That's what the story's about. So, it would have been interesting, and I think some other folks have tried to circle back to those same ideas in recent decades, and to try to rehabilitate the interesting ideas that Lovecraft had, but remove from them the very provincial racism that drove a lot of what Lovecraft wrote. Now, Lovecraft also, I think, was moving away from that in his final years, but he died at age 36 or something like that, so he died very young, and maybe did not have the time to come all the way out of it. So, Lovecraft Country, the HBO series, I watched a few episodes of that. It's reasonably interesting. The book might be better. But I certainly didn't think it was scary. Where I did, if you watch the old, if you ever seen the Dunwich Horror film with Dean Stockwell and Sandra Dee, I think, which is an atrociously cheesy movie. Even I found that creepy even as a kid. The same is not really true of Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard had very different ideas, and was never coming from a. It's the 1920s and 30s. Everybody's a racist, right? But Howard was coming at it from a different angle, where he saw a lot to admire in what would have been considered uncivilized people. And that's why all his central characters are these sort of people existing on the edge of civilization. So I would not put Howard in the same category. Well, so that's another thing, is even during Lovecraft's lifetime, there were other people dabbling in the Cthulhu mythos, or what we now call the Cthulhu mythos, a term invented after Lovecraft was dead by August Derleth. Even during Lovecraft's lifetime, Clark Ashton Smith was writing stuff that is mythos stories. Robert E. Howard was writing mythos stuff. Robert Bloch was writing mythos stuff. And, of course, there's been decades and decades of additional stuff in that territory since then, a lot of which is really good, actually. The Charles Stross stuff is particularly good, I think, of the modern things. There's a story by Charles Stross, who created some of the monsters in the Fiend Folio, by the way, who's a sci-fi writer now, and a really good one. There's a story called A Colder War, which is available to read online, which I highly recommend. Jason Williams published a 6-volume set of Clark Ashton Smith, because that's awesome. Because I might have those, actually, if they're the 5 volumes, and then the other one is like the miscellaneous writing, because I have those in electronic format, and those are the definitive edition of the works of Clark Ashton Smith, who's a tremendous writer, by the way, and who I think doesn't get enough credit. Which mythos writer was the weird artist? I'm not sure who we're referring to in this case. Mark Wallace. I'm not familiar with him either. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, those are great. Those are the definitive version. You can get them on Amazon. Oh, the William Hope Hodgson stuff might also be interesting. I'm much more into Clark Ashton Smith, though. A tremendously underrated writer, actually. It's one of the reasons why I grabbed that Castle Amber book from Goodman Games, is because that's based on, sort of, It's the Castle Amber module for D&D that is sort of based on a Clark Ashton Smith set of stories, sort of. So now Chaosium is operating out of Michigan, as I recall. Presumably, they've been priced out of the market in Berkeley. Stigler, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week, hopefully. Also, don't forget, we'll be on Wednesday with Dan. I think we're on this channel this week, I think. I'll verify that. I have no idea what our topic is, once again. I don't know that I've found that to be the case with Charles Stross, to be honest. I mean, I'm not reading the laundry stuff, though. I tried to read the first one and couldn't get through it. So that maybe those are the works that you're talking about. But, I mean, the short stories are mostly what I've read, and those are all really good. How many game companies are based in Michigan? Chaosium is now. There's at least a couple other ones. There's a couple in Ohio, I can tell you that. Tritac was in Ohio. The folks who did Nightlife were in Ohio. The folks who did this wasn't their product. This was the name of Shield Laminations, was the name of the company. They were in Ohio. A Study in Emerald is by Neil Gaiman. That's really good. That might be online as well, actually. That's a really neat mythos story, actually. Different Worlds covered a lot of different stuff, including some stuff that's very different from anything Chaosium did. Different Worlds also published an edition of Empire of the Petal Throne, which is essentially a reprint of the TSR boxed game, and in a in a staple-bound book. And then they did the first. This would have been after Game Science had the property, because they did two of. So there was they split Swords and Glory Volume 1 into 3 volumes, and then they published 2 volumes. And they didn't get to the third one, and they never got to Swords and Glory Volume 2. And Swords and Glory Volume 3 was never published by anybody. That was the Bestiary. Swords and Glory Volume 2 was pretty rare for a while. So Game Science was Luzaki at the time, and I think the story was, anyway, that a hurricane washed most of Lu's inventory out into the Gulf of Mexico. I have read the first 4 Steven Erikson Malazan books. They're really good. The second one is exceptionally good. And I have gotten stuck several times trying to get into the 5th one. So, Midnight Tides is the one I get stuck on. I think that's the 5th one. There is a game about A Study in Emerald, too. That's true. I was talking about the story, which is really good. There is a game based on the Laundry books, the Laundry series by Charles Stross, too. That is... Forget who the publisher is of that. But it's... If you're into that, it's like The Office meets the Cthulhu mythos, sort of. Part of the problem was that book 5 is one of several places in the series where it starts like completely. It's like a complete reboot, you know, where it's like it's a completely unfamiliar place with unfamiliar characters and nobody you recognize, and eventually maybe somebody you recognize will come in. But in the meantime, it's like, I don't know what's going on. I mean, that is a problem with the series anyway, because Erikson doesn't tell you anything. You've got to figure it out. And it would probably be difficult for me. I'd probably have to read some synopses of books 1 through 4. I've actually read about 4 books in the last 2 weeks. A couple of which have been Alistair Reynolds' sci-fi stuff. I read Robert J. Sawyer's The Oppenheimer Alternative, which is kind of a fun alternate history of Edward Teller finds that the sun is going to... have a Nova event in the 2030s when they're working on the Manhattan Project. So J. Robert Oppenheimer has to put together a super team of all the great minds that were in physics at the time. It's neat. The ending is a bit of a letdown. All of the, if you're into physics, all the names will be mentioned, but then certain names like Heisenberg and Chandrasekhar are like mentioned. Oh, we'll recruit Heisenberg and Chandrasekhar, and then they're never mentioned again. It's like, well, why did we bother to recruit these people? He mentions Kurchatov, but not Sakharov for whatever reason. Definitely well researched, and the part of examination of Oppenheimer, though. So almost all of the fiction I read has been sci-fi, like hard sci-fi in recent years. The current read is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is very much not hard sci-fi, but it's difficult prose, but it's also fairly short. So, I've read Revelation Space and Redemption Arc, and I just reread Revelation Space, and I didn't remember it being as good as it was, because it was really good. I have Redemption Arc, and I'm going to start in on that pretty soon. Chasm City is another one that I have. I do all this in ebook format. I don't have space to put physical books. I'm missing something. Clearly. Asimov did do that at least once, where you're like, what happened? Who are these people? Who are these weird aliens? Holy cow. But that's a really good, that's The Gods Themselves, which is a really good book. It's debatably Asimov's best book. I have a lot of fondness. It's probably Asimov's best book, but I have a lot of fondness for The End of Eternity as well. There is, of course, a Foundation TV series coming on Apple TV sometime before the end of the year. Not sure what to make of it yet. I want to see it. Not sure what to make of it. They did get Jared Harris to play Harry Seldon, which is a great piece of casting. So hopefully everything else will be equally good. I need to finish The Earth of the New Sun. I can tell you that, because I have 2 books into that, and I stopped, and I should pick that up again. I'd probably have to start it over, to be honest. Ken MacLeod, I think I have at least one Ken MacLeod somewhere in the queue. I did not enjoy the David Drake Hammerslammers books. I only read the first one. I did not enjoy it. I think I have really narrow taste when it comes to military science fiction. Certainly, The Forever War is a great book. Dated, but it's a great book. It's actually at least 10, maybe 20 years younger than Starship Troopers, and it's less dated than Starship Troopers. That's a great book. To the extent that it is military sci-fi is a matter of debate. It's really more of a philosophical book. For All Mankind is pretty cool. What else have I read? I've tried the Jerry Pournelle Janissaries stuff. I couldn't stand. The Lost Fleet series. I'm trying to remember who the author is. Those are pretty good. That's probably not military sci-fi in the strict sense, but the Black Company stuff is really good. Man, I've been waiting for that Dune thing for what feels like years. I could swear that thing was supposed to originally come out in 2019. It probably was, and it was probably 2020, but it's been delayed so many times. It looks cool. A lot of changes are probably going to be made. That's fine on paper. I really want to see it, see how it looks. I'm a conflicted fan of the David Lynch Dune and the sci-fi miniseries Dune. One of these days I have to read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, actually. I know there was a BBC production of that, which was supposed to be pretty good. Old Man's War is really good, actually. That's John Scalzi. That's really good. And there's a whole series of books in that sequence now, too, actually. The Black Company's also really neat. There's a lot of really neat ideas in there. I don't like his naming practices where it's all the sort of literalist names. I don't care for that. I mean, I don't mind some of that. I have a problem where all the names are like these literal names. What the Jason? What is your publishing firm? The Toto Duke's doing soundtrack. Don't forget the one Brian Eno track too. Um, I feel like it would have been better if it had been all Brian Eno actually. So I don't know what went on with that. So how much time do we have? We don't have that much time, so maybe we have to talk about this next week. But um, the the thing that makes me worried about the Foundation series, the TV series, is that they're already talking about it's this 1,000-year story, but they found it impossible to have different characters in every era. So they're going to have like some characters that are in all the eras, which says to me that I don't think they're going to pay very close attention to the story. I don't know. We'll see. I really want to see it. The Green Knight movie looks neat, actually. Lost Fleet is Jack Campbell, yeah. And those are quite good. There was an audio drama of The Mists of Avalon, released years and years and years ago, that was really well done. And I did like that book in the era, the sort of realm of Arthurian stuff. Nightshade Books. That does ring a bell. Well, so, all right. So as far as I could tell, the Foundation thing is the emperors are clones of each other, so they keep cloning the same emperor, which is this thing that is like, okay, fine. This was not really in the original story, but I guess it means that they can just have Lee Pace be the emperor for 1,000 years. But in the books, the Empire is not around for 1,000 years. The Empire goes way after 200. So, hard to say. I've never read any of the Honor Harrington books. Those are supposed to be pretty good. So that's pretty awesome, Jason. Not that you sold it, but that you were the guy responsible for these books that I have, and which I have a very high opinion of, actually. The Three Body Problem is on the list of things I would like to read, but right now I cannot commit to that. So I'll let me pull that up, and I can do it here. Okay, so currently reading is How Do We Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. I read Century Reign by Alistair Reynolds, which was great. Redemption Arc, and Chasm City are in the pile to read. There's a book, I got to read When Titans Clashed Again by Glance and House. I've got The Great Illyrian Revolt by Jason Abdall, which is about the Illyrian Revolt in the very, I think, 1st century. A couple Earthsea books were on sale. I think I'll read those at some point. I have a very high opinion of the Earthsea books. And of Ursula Le Guin. I've got some Ian Banks in the queue to read, so there's plenty to read here. I don't think I've done any reading today. So I think we've talked about everything, and we've probably done less talking about wargames tonight. than we have done in any stream ever, and that might have been why the numbers dropped off precipitously at one point. We're still at 63, which is pretty good. We did top out at 101, which is not a record, but it's still really good. The George Alec Effinger thing is something I'd like to read as well. Those are supposed to be really good. George did not have a happy end. Let me put it that way. George did not have a happy end. I'm not talking about the books. Different Worlds put out a sci-fi RPG. I don't think I was aware of that. There's that new Scalzi series, The Collapsing Empire, which is supposed to be pretty good, too. I might get to that at some point. So, don't be shocked if I get off onto a digression. Hell, at some point I'll probably talk about the Cleveland Guardians at some point. God, they gotta fix that logo. That logo is terrible. Alright, so I would like to thank everybody for tuning in. Next, so I will make the sale video announcements according to plan next Monday on Monday's stream, and I will have info on any on the schedule at that time. The plan is to release the next sale video and the giveaway video next week. So hopefully we can get them done in the meantime. So I would like to thank everybody for tuning in. I would especially like to thank folks who have helped out the channel in various ways, including, helping me out with stuff, or have contributed on the Ko-Fi or the Patreon, both of which you can find linked in the video description. Lots of folks are wearing the fine Ardwulf Lair attire, which even I'm not, because it's in the dryer right now. So they're all in the dryer. They're all either dirty or in the dryer right now, which is why I'm wearing this thing with no sleeves. But I would like to thank everybody for tuning in. Remember that hopefully I'll have that unboxing video out this week. And hopefully... Oh, Jason, that's fantastic. Thank you. Hopefully you are now aware of the wide world of YouTube wargaming channels, of which there's a lot. So again, thanks everybody, and we'll see you all next week. Don't forget the stream. It will be here on this channel at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday with Mr. Dan Pencaldi of No Enemies Here. Topic we have probably already talked about it, and I probably forgot what it was. But tune in, and it'll be an hour of spirited discussion and making fun of our Canadian friends. So thanks everybody.